and Managing Director of Input on Education. To begin with, Input on Education is a company which provides academic and business support services to foreign language schools. On the other hand, TESOL Macedonia Thrace in northern Greece is the English Teachers Association in northern Greece, and it is based in Thessaloniki and has been affiliated with IATEFL as long as since 2015. So these are two basic areas of Maria's activity. However, she's the English teachers. She's also the chair. Yes, she has been the chairperson since TESOL Macedonia Thrace since 2016. She is also a part-time lecturer at the English Studies Department of the International Faculty of the University of Sheffield, and I see some of the posts on her on your Facebook profile, Maria. Very interesting. English as a foreign language teacher, straight up. I can't read this one, but
I'm sure you can't.
What is it?
Marco Giannopoulou.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I probably wouldn't have managed to read it so well. And very briefly about Maria's research interests. The first area, brain-friendly teaching. The construction of teachers' identity. Then also understanding self-sustained learning environments. And last but not least, a very interesting idea to study these. Maria has been studying, she has been self-teaching her Polish. So this is a very interesting and important fact about Maria, which I myself really admire. And now just a few words about Maria's webinar history. As I said before, Maria is the pioneer of webinar session for IATEFL Poland. And the very first webinar that Maria presented to IATEFL Poland was on Wednesday, the 17th of January in 2018, and that concerned teacher development for teachers at different stages of their professional careers. And what is important about this webinar and the next one is that Maria, at that time, we didn't have our Click platform, and Maria invited us to her own virtual room for input on education, and that was really an amazing thing to do for us. And the next webinar, the same story. Approximately a year later, also on Wednesday, the 16th of January 2019, Maria told us about engaging learners in active learning in her own virtual room again. And right now, eventually, we have this Click platform, and Maria is going to have a webinar for us concerning teaching and learning, and her reflection on whether it is cause and effect or process of interaction. And just a few words of summary was included in the invitation, but just to remind you, teachers complain that what they teach is not what students learn. Yes, and also despite the fact that we would like to obtain the outcomes of learning for a longer time, yes, longer lasting outcomes of learning process, students have a tendency to learn, forget, learn, pass the exam and forget. Yes, in Polish language there is 3 Z's, yes, zakuć, zdać, zapomnieć, as probably Maria will understand with her perfect Polish language skills.
Just A2.
And this session attempts to discuss the causes of this phenomenon and maybe hopefully suggest how it might be overcome. So the stage is yours, Maria. We are very happy to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. Szczęśliwego Nowego Roku. It's always such a great pleasure to be back. And I say be back even if it's virtual. Congratulations on getting this fantastic platform. It's a milestone for every association when we manage to get our e-home. I haven't been to Poland for a couple of years now because of family problems and technical details. Sometimes it seems that Poland is very close to Greece, and at other times it feels that it's miles apart, and very pricey to get there. So, today's session is very close to what we discussed last year about engaging learners into active learning. I've been thinking about this situation for a very long time. So, when it's hard to find answers, we usually turn to questions. So, one question that we can all ask, and I'm sure the answer is going to be unanimous, is, are teachers important in students' learning? Are we important? Simple yes or no will do. I like the very diplomatic answer, kinda. I also like Lucina's answer as I hope so. These are great answers. Yes, you've given me a lot of food for thought. And I'm going to side with kinda. The reason is because, of course, it depends on the students. I believe that in the last few, not years, I think it's over a decade, we've assumed way too much responsibility. If you remember, about a year ago, 2 years ago, there was a Facebook profile photo where you could have a frame around your photo and it said, "Teachers change lives." Not really. I would love to change people's lives if A, lives need changing. I'm not the judge of that. I cannot be. I shouldn't be. B, if learners are interested in changing their lives. Sometimes lives might be, or ways of studying, or levels of learning, or whatever might be quite off, and students might insist that it's fine, it works for me. What's your problem? Not everybody is going to be academically inclined or qualified, and some people will learn and then forget. And it's their attitude in life, perhaps. So, if we cannot affect our students' lives, why are we important? Let's have a look. As teachers, we affect our students' learning through the way we teach them. So, first of all, we provide the inspiration for teaching. As I usually tell my TESOL students, my students at the International Faculty of the University of Sheffield, here in Thessaloniki, located at City College, it is very hard for students, it is very hard for all of us to keep learning from people who have stopped learning themselves. So, as engineers of learning environments and learning projects, what we do is look at the material, design ways of presenting that material to our students. And I don't mean simply lesson planning, I mean something broader than that, from assessment methods to projects to the material that we're going to use, even to the exams that those students will take. It all matters, and it makes a huge difference in their lives and in their learning. And we also put the passion of learning and the fire of learning in between what we do and what we teach. So it's not merely teaching the material. It is not merely following a methodology. It is more than that. We put a piece of our soul in it. And the more we spend time planning our classes, the more we spend time making sure that we translate this chaotic language, and I don't mean chaotic because it's English. Any language can be chaotic for a non-native speaker. Imagine what it means to start learning the ABCs of the language and then manage to speak that language at C2 level and be able to understand irony and sarcasm and complicated uses of idioms or metaphors and make sense and even convey the same meaning in different levels of formality. So the teacher manages to do that by mediating between the teacher and the material. We do that not only by planning our classes, but by working behind the scenes and actually managing the environment in which we work. At the same time, we manage the class climate, the climate that the way that students bond with each other, the way that we bond with them. We spend time getting to know them, and we also spend a lot of time being their personal booster. We spend time getting to know them so that we can make them see themselves from another point of view. This also goes towards their families as well, because sometimes students have very strict parents and they get only the negative side of their themselves, let's say, pointed out to them. And we as teachers know better than that. We need to make sure that our students understand and our students know how much we value their contribution. At the same time, as educators, we know the importance of having high expectations. It is very difficult for learners to learn when teachers look at them, but don't actually see them, or we give them the cold shoulder because their concerns and their questions are invalid. And why does that happen? Because we do not expect that those students are learning. We do not expect that those students are actually asking a question. We have a preconceived mentality, preconceived idea in our heads that this particular student is wasting my time. I've given him or her too many chances. He's not actually interested in learning. This is just a way to sidetrack the lesson. The more we expect for our students, the more we see them as potentially learners who can all achieve the greatest and the best, the more this is put forward to them. And it is not a crime to expect. It's not extra stress for them. In my opinion, it's what creates the magic. We do have to expect more from them. And we also take a keen interest. We notice and monitor what happens in class with them, how they start reacting when we first meet them, and then how they expand this, or unfortunately how they limit this. I'm sure that if we started and if we had time to compare stories and notes, we would find out that very often the teachers of English were the first to notice that something was wrong at home, or something was wrong with the student's eyes, or that potentially the student has a learning difficulty. And this is because we notice. Our lessons are not simply bookwork. They are not simply write down and then learn by heart and then write a test and it's okay. Learning is a lot more than that. So what happens? What do we get out of this? We have given our students a lot of qualifiable, qualitative, let's say, values and even our own soul. But everywhere in the world, success equals a mark. Success equals passing grades, money spent, money invested. So what happens is that when students do not pass exams, we get a finger pointed at us. It's your fault. You didn't do enough. And being the people we are and representing one of the most guilt-ridden professions, I suppose priests experience the same thing. But in our case, it's even more pronounced because it's, how can I put it? It's students' lives. And when we give them so much that cannot actually be broken down into numbers and sums, I cannot say how much personal interest I've taken into each one of my students, but I know that those who needed me the most had most of me because it was obvious that they needed somebody to be on their corner. So we spend a lot of time head scratching and thinking, what went wrong? How can I teach them and they don't learn? Why don't they follow my lovely strategies, my lovely autonomy training, all the things that I teach them so that they can pass exams? In a way, what happens is the following. We give students all of the things that you can see as steps for them to reach a goal. We forget all of these when time comes, and we start seeing at ourselves and our profession the way let's say, the lay people outside schools, the parents, perhaps the managerial staff of the school, perhaps even the political leadership behind exams, may that be ministries of education or exam boards. We get to see teaching through their vision, through their eyes. And we forget that as teachers, we cannot learn for ourselves. I cannot be guilty because I didn't learn in the place of my student. I am guilty if I didn't teach my students. So we need to separate things that might seem to be happening and causing each other, but in actual fact, they do not. In fact, when I do this training session with Greek teachers, and I'm not sure if the same happens in Polish, I'm not that advanced as a student, but in Greek, we have a verb that means I study and learn for myself, and another one which means I teach. And the difference is in that very many Greek students use the verb learn to talk about teaching. So they say, thinking and with a lot of L1 transference and interference, they say, Miss, will you learn us? And it's a great opportunity to correct them and tell them, teach us. I cannot learn you. I cannot learn anything for anybody else. I can learn only for myself. And this, in a way, is the beginning of all autonomy training. We cannot replace the student's determination. We cannot replace the student's own inspiration. We can inspire them, but there is a point, there is an extent to which I can inspire others. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we have seen knowledge and the value of knowledge being devalued every step of the way. And students sometimes see this whole thing as something that only teachers experience in that way. We cannot have passion for someone else. We cannot replace other people's vision. They have to have these, or at least the seeds of that, so that they can appreciate what we give them and we can meet halfway. So, more questions. What does it mean to be successful as a teacher? One would say that the basis of our work is when we write down those long documents, our syllabi, and we set our learning outcomes and we set aims, and we hope that by the end of the year, or by the end of this lesson, by the end of this unit, students will have accomplished certain things. And it's a very easy way to tell apart the aims from the learning outcomes. We can aim to do certain things in class and phrase them using verbs that are connected with Bloom's taxonomy, and then the students, having been exposed to that kind of teaching, will be able to understand language or topics or structures or skills and use them in the way stated in the learning outcomes. All of that sounds amazingly simple, and yet it's not, because we do not simply teach one student. And even if we taught one student, we have not followed the student all the way across. Another thing that concerns us as educators is how long students can attain the results of our teaching. And if this happens, is it autonomous learning or is it a mechanical recall? In my country, there is heavy reliance on recalling, and this saddens me. It saddens me as much as the fact that grammar translation happens to be so widespread in the 21st century, while so many other more exciting methodologies and ways to teach foreign languages have been tested and tried and have given us great scientific results that they work. So, is it something that they can recall, or is it something that they truly know? How can I tell the difference? And in the end, how can I make in-class acquisition more durable? And as you can see, I didn't use learning because, as I said, learning has to be at some point up to the students. We are there to give them the inspiration. They should take the inspiration and make it a reality. But it's there that we need to intervene. How do you take inspiration and actually apply it to turn it into reality? So, as I said before, Teaching and learning, they happen in the same environment. They happen in the classroom. They happen almost at the same time. But based on brain scans and scientific analysis of what happens when we process thoughts, material that is being presented, how different people and different learners interact with listening material or reading material, we now know that no two learners learn in the same way. And last year, when we talked about engagement, I mentioned that in the previous years, in the previous decades, partly in the 1970s and 80s, when I was in primary school, I think, and I got this pretty much from every teacher that I had, we were viewed as clones of one another. Sit tight, don't talk too much, do what your teacher tells you, your teacher knows best, and you are going to learn, and don't ask too many questions because nobody likes people who interrupt the class. But we do not all learn in the same way. Students are not, let's say, at the same wavelength all the time. They cannot be. They have individual differences. They have different learning biographies. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So for the time being, I'm going to simply make a very clear suggestion that the more we think that the moment we teach, they learn, and the more parents and perhaps schools and school managers and managers of educational policies think that the moment we say something and we present something, the students have learned it, and this learning magically works for life, we have problems. There is a lot that goes into making learning durable, into anchoring it in our long-term memory and actually making it last for a lifetime. As language teachers, we know that. The first thing that we need to understand is that learners need to understand that they cannot shed responsibility. This was the situation, as I said before, in the previous decades. We were under the impression that learners were passive. They were often seen as white pieces of paper, as tabula rasa. They were considered to be empty vessels filled with the knowledge that is poured into their heads by the all-omniscient teacher. Nowadays, we know that this is impossible. Nobody comes into class without some kind of knowledge, some kind of achievement, and some kind of acquisition that has already taken place. Even kids who are just now entering their education or the country's educational system as L1 learners. So how can we make that shift? How can we make students not that, let's say, weight that we have to drag along, but actual partners in this process? Before I analyze that, I think we need to see what is needed. And it is easy to talk about these things, but it is very hard to turn them into reality. So the first thing that we need is smaller groups. I think it's been proven in reality that teaching languages is not easily achieved or feasible in huge auditoriums with a huge number of learners, no matter how old the learners are, how advanced they are, or whether they are just now entering their English language learning. Having a small group of learners allows us to plan, allows us to get to know our learners individually, and it helps us plan classes which are individualized for this particular group. I don't mean for this student in particular, but taking into consideration the strengths and the abilities of these students. At the same time, we need to realize that for everything, there are best practices and there are cozy practices. The best practices are hard. They're hard for us, because they take a lot more work, a lot more preparation at home, a lot more planning, perhaps research, investment in our own CPD, because we as experts, we need to have a solid scientific background to justify why we go for the hard path and we don't just simply settle for the easy path. And there are also cozy practices, and cozy practices are easily justified. For example, I'll just use translation as an example, mainly because there is a question. It depends. What kind of translation? For example, if there is a part of the text which my B2 or C1, C2 learners cannot understand because of an idiom or because of a phrase that seems to be the same as it is in their L1, but it is actually a faux ami and it's causing a problem, it's causing misunderstanding, then in that case, I can use translation as a tool, but I use it judiciously and sporadically. On the other hand, if I have a group of, let's say, B1 learners, and instead of letting them understand the text by inferring word meaning from context, I get them to translate, or I translate for them all the words in L1, I put forward a very dangerous message for the future. I tell them, and for the time being it might be attainable, but in the future it won't be, I tell them that you should always understand all of the vocabulary and then attempt to read the text or attempt to understand the text. Unfortunately, this is never going to be true, not in that way. B1 exams will have just a little bit of vocabulary that reaches B2 just to catch those who are already at B2 level, or to make sure that students have understood exam strategies and how they can circumvent this little trap of sorts. Native speakers read texts and they find material, they find vocabulary items they don't understand. They don't stop. We might, out of professional, let's say, interest, look up the words in a dictionary, but even if we didn't want to find out what that means, it doesn't stop us from understanding. And this has to do a lot, not only with the teaching of reading or vocabulary, but with our attitude. Another example I'm going to give you. Our students spend about, so in Greece, most private lessons or most language lessons in a private language school last 90 minutes. If not 90, it would be 75. The other durations, 75 minutes, 45 minutes or an hour, are the exception, not the rule. So they have a 90-minute class and they get to spend most of it replying in a very contrived, already pre-described, very prescriptive two-word reply that has been defined by the gaps in the book, by the grammar book slots, or by the practice test slots. So there is one true answer, or perhaps two true answers, and that's it. The others are incorrect. The problem is not exam training. The problem is not as simplistic as it might seem. Oh, we shouldn't perhaps use grammar books. Yes, we should. I've got my Polish grammar books here. Of course we need, I barely make sense out of them, but then again, I try. Of course we need to go down to the grassroots and explain the chaos of grammar and syntax to our students bit by bit, as we've been doing. It shouldn't be the only thing that we do. It should be part of the things that we do. Translation as a tool should be part of the things that we do. At the same time, we need to get our students to expand their output. We need to help them learn things in a way so that their pre-existing knowledge is activated. No reading is simply a reading. No speaking is simply a speaking. Every task, every exam task, every exercise has a topic behind it. This topic has been discussed before, or has connections with something that we have discussed before. All of these are little opportunities, little golden chances to get the students to go back to the language they know, bring this vocabulary back, present it, discuss it, do something with the language. The other day, I was telling my adult students, let's get those juices flowing after Christmas and let's have a discussion on this topic. And they were excited about the idiom. They were too excited, to be honest, about the idiom. They really felt that this was something we did so that they could wake up the knowledge that has fallen asleep. And along with the knowledge that has fallen asleep, it is very easy for students to think, oh, okay, now she's talking about I don't know what, and who cares? And it's late and I want to go out and I haven't been allowed to go out with my boyfriend, girlfriend. So I've got other stuff to think. The mind has fled. The mind is not there. It's gone. Therefore, the student is not learning, has not invested. Another issue that stops learners from investing and actually being present in their own learning is negative transfer. So every time we teach something, for reasons that might have to do with the way students study or don't study at home, the way we presented and the time we had to cover this material, or a number of other reasons that might be student-specific or case-specific, students might misunderstand parts of this, or they might not be fully aware of how this is used in practice. This creates negative transfer. Negative transfer means that the students do not know how this is used. They are confused. They have questions. This piece of knowledge that has been acquired already stops them from understanding how they are going to learn in the future. And anything that is connected with this skill, structure, piece of knowledge cannot be easily learned. This on its own creates differences in the pace that students learn. Positive transfer also means the creation of what we call in brain-friendly research and brain-friendly teaching, hooks for learning. So every time we teach our students something, every time we present a structure, we give them an indication of how this structure is used. We ask them to engage with this structure and first get to learn it, get to understand how to use it. And gradually, through, let's say, removing our control, we let them produce it. Therefore, they already have something, a part of this structure, which they can now start producing more easily. And this helps them when they have to learn something that is dependent on this structure. And in general, I must say that learners do not spend time at home on their own thinking, okay, so now I have learned this word, I have learned this phrasal verb. Where can I use it? Unless we do that for them, they will never bother. It's not part of the way the teenage brain or the teenage person thinks. I'm not sure if it's now or in the past, but personally, I was always worried about words that I couldn't understand how they fitted into the language. But then again, it turned out that my brain was geared towards language learning and teaching, and I've always loved this. I cannot expect everybody to be thinking in that way. So what do we need to do? We need time. We need to spend less time thinking of how quickly we cover units, how quickly we go through pages and pages of exercises, and actually get the learners to see how they can use certain structures to talk about life and to use it in actual language. Going back to the basics, this is the famous pyramid, Bloom's taxonomy. And I like the way it's been created because it shows us the way that students are expected to use each and every step. Now, if you see this, as I mentioned before, in my country, we heavily rely on learning by heart, parroting, not in language learning. That's what sets apart English language teaching from mainstream education. But languages are a thing that kind of falls mainly on the private sector, private foreign language schools. And part of this is the huge number of students in class, which does not allow teachers to create workshops for learning. So if we look at this, what we notice is that we spend a lot of time teaching students facts, basic concepts, and then we get the learners to show how they have understood those concepts. Perhaps we ask them questions. In some cases, we ask them to apply this. That's more in the case of, well, of course, languages, but also mathematics, science, chemistry. They need to see how each and every thing they learn can be applied, and the more they apply it in practice, the more they learn. The problem is that actual critical thinking skills begin when we start going up from here. Okay, we've applied. What else can we do? We need to be able to analyze the new things that we learn, perhaps critically evaluate them as well, have an opinion. I have been hugely let down because in the last few years, I always tell my students, I have let's say, I'm happy to be teaching strategy classes as well as English language classes, but they're strategy classes for the Cambridge exams. And I always tell my students that when it comes to speaking, there is no right or wrong. There are no answers that will get you in trouble. So make sure that you reply using expressing your opinion. And that's what kind of practice we do in class. That's how we discuss matters. Now, very often I get students to reply to a question that has to do with their own opinion. I don't know. And it's not the kind of I don't know that it's a gambit. It's I haven't thought about it. Let me think about it now. No, it's I don't know. Can't remember. Why should I know? And it shows that they are not used to being asked to evaluate or take a stand, take an opinion, support with arguments. And those arguments need to be based on all the previous layers of the pyramid. Of course, they wouldn't focus. Of course, their mind would have fled. Finally, teenagers and children and adult learners have great abilities to understand and create new things with the language they learn, the language they acquire. So what we need to do is get them to actually produce things, not simply produce as in presentation, practice, production. We need to get more creativity. The reason why publishers are turning towards project-based learning, task-based learning, CLIL, it's because it opens up greater paths and gives teachers and students greater opportunities to co-explore topics together. And through this co-exploration, they create this opportunity, first of all, to interact. Secondly, to understand how concepts work. And if all of this is done in L2, then it's a win-win situation. Nobody can lose. Are there any questions so far? Anything you would like me to address? Okay, so for the next few slides, what I would like us to see is what gets in the way of our teaching. Why in the past we had teachers who taught us as clones of one another and they got successful results, and why nowadays this is not easy? First of all, I feel that much like with teenage years and adolescent years, there is a very heavy social influence on these. So in the past, perhaps it was possible to see students as clones of one another. These days, it's not. And they would rebel at it as well. So what happens within us? What happens within when we teach? First of all, it's very easy for us to forget that classes are systems of interaction. Why and how do we do that? Um, First of all, as I said before, teaching is a guilt-ridden profession. So we forget that it's not always our fault that our students are not learning, or that what they learn gets forgotten, or that they do not invest in their learning. What do we lose out of that? We lose sight of the fact that when we talk about systems and systems of interaction, the moment we change one cog in the system, one part of the system, we change the outcome. And in order to affect the students, in order to affect the outcome, we need to affect our own teaching. We need to change our own teaching. Teaching compared to learning is technical, can be planned, and it is also less chaotic. Unfortunately, learning is a big ocean, and those involved in learning, and we know it from firsthand experience. We open a book, we open a set of published conference papers to read, and we are in a way amazed at how much we have to process, and sometimes it seems chaotic to even go through all those articles. So what happens here is that we keep talking about fossilized mistakes, but actually there are fossilized teaching habits, and it is very difficult to get out of these habits. One of these, let's say, fossilized habits is that it's very easy to teach in a generic way. So I have taught this book before, preparing students for, let's say, B2 exams, Cambridge. I know the format. I've been teaching this exam for a long time. I know the brief. I've read the handbooks. I know my mode of teaching. Well, change the mode of teaching. The more we keep teaching the same material, I'm not saying change the exam, A, because that's not up to the teachers, and B, because perhaps the exam works fine. What we need to change is how we get the students to approach the material for the exams. Because if we focus on the exam and the mark and the percentages, the students will focus as well. Usually what I tell my learners is that the entire year we learn the language, but there are times when we simply focus on the exam simply to make sure that we all have the same tools to face the exam. I do have a question. Let me check. Lack of imagination. It's about adults. Lack of imagination, lack of creativity. Personally, I would say that what I find with adults, and my adult learners are all educators. They do not teach English, they teach Greek, but they are high powered executives. And this makes them very stubborn when it comes to their own learning. For example, they do not want to spend time speaking in English because they are afraid of the mistakes they make. But at the same time, unless they speak, those mistakes won't go away. Personally, the stand that I like to take towards adult learners is to explain that we all have our area of specialization. So you're adults, you're teachers, but you teach a totally different subject. So for the time being, for 2 hours per week, forget who you are, forget that you are teachers, simply try to learn in a different way. Try to learn in a way that focuses less on recall and more on you using what you know to communicate. Languages are not learned simply for us to pass exams. Languages are learned so that we can communicate. I wouldn't say that they are not creative. I've seen them spark and sparkle at the same time, and they get great pleasure in what they have accomplished. Perhaps they are not always ready to join in, impromptu projects or express vulnerability, but not necessarily everybody likes this. And I wouldn't bet that all my teenage classes like that. I can understand though why they are so, let's say, persistent in the way they learn. And the higher up we go, the more educated the individual, the more difficult it is to convince them that there might be other ways of learning. So going back to our fossilized teaching habits, it's very easy to present language as chunks. we talk about chunks of language. We talk about how we chunk the reading text, and how experienced and fluent readers and successful readers chunk the task. It is very easy to fall prey of that and forget that we need to actually show the learners how those bits and pieces can be combined and how they create knowledge. It is also very easy to forget about form, to forget about meaning and focus on form. Personally, I do not believe that it is easy to do everything at the same time. I do not believe that it is always easy for learners of different levels and different age groups and perhaps different proficiency to try to acquire the form, and at the same time grapple with complex meanings and levels of formality and styles. We need to simplify that. We need to give them steps and stages in their learning. But at the same time, I need to know that when this round finishes, another round is going to start, and we will be using this in active speaking, in active writing, so that we can form connections. Another problem that I've already mentioned, one of our fossilized teaching habits, is the fact that we want to keep our students' speech error-free. There is a reason for that. In some schools, parents have a very heavy hand. They ask too many questions. They want to see that they get the best that they can get, especially if they are paying for this kind of education. And we want to give them this kind of security. But making mistakes, learners making mistakes when they speak or when they produce language, means that somebody has invested in actually designing a task that is going to help them get better. So they might appear to be making mistakes. In actual fact, they are investing in their future fluency. On the contrary, spending a lot of time speaking Greek in class, speaking Polish in class, and I'm talking about different teaching countries and teaching environments, obviously, and giving two-word answers for 90 minutes will never translate into fluency. It's not possible. The human brain does not learn in that way. So, an instructional framework. Learning should produce more than just the behaviors required for the task. So what we teach our learners should not be just to tackle a transformations exercise or a reading text or even an exam on its own. But this is broken down into grades. So first comes acquisition. The students need to learn what they have to use in order to express themselves. Then there should be practice, and they should recycle this so that fluency can be installed. But we shouldn't forget about this structure. It should be maintained through frequent recycling. And as you can see, the importance of using the L2 in class becomes even more pronounced the more we talk about this framework. Then we need to be able to transfer that in other environments, not simply the grammar book. Today, I had a class earlier with my A2 learners. They're adorable, but they're so hard to keep them focused. And although we've been working with different endings for present simple, and they're trying to learn the ways to the spelling rules and the pronunciation and how fix becomes he fixes, and it's almost one extra syllable. Today they were completely at sea, and of course that make me feel frustrated, and it can contribute to my own demotivation. If I see that my students do not appreciate or do not understand how much hard work it is for me to present and organize my teaching so that their learning can be organized, I might give up. So this generalization, moving away from the grammar book and taking the grammatical structure and using it in a way that it can become error-free in the end, is difficult. And that's where adaptation comes in. And adaptation means the ability of the student to know which structures they need to use, which let's say, skills they need to employ in order to tackle different areas of their language proficiency. But this takes time. It's simply not something that we can do overnight. We have a continuation in our discussion about adults. I wouldn't agree. Adults simply need specific subjects, usually related to what they do in everyday life, individual interests. They work more efficiently in smaller groups. Actually, it all depends. Adult teaching is, I would say, a specialized webinar on its own, but I wouldn't disagree with what you said. I think I agree with you wholly. It's totally right. You're absolutely right. They do need specific subjects. And the difference between that and teaching children or teenagers is that adults come to us for a very specific reason. They do not have time to kill, they do not have multiple opportunities because, hey, you're not in any hurry. Usually adults come to us either because they need a language qualification for their work purposes, because they're moving abroad, because they need to apply for a higher job, or because they're changing jobs. They have a very specific agenda. And to be honest, I am happy when adults come to me with an agenda. If they are, in a way, as I say, very romantic, and they're kind of like butterflies painting flowers and, interested in language learning, I know that they are going to split after Christmas. They're going to run, and they're going to find language learning demanding, because contrary to going to the gym is fine. You go to the gym, you have a lovely time. Well, as lovely as it can be. You do something good for your body and for your health. You have nothing to do at home. Perhaps make sure you do not overeat, but other than that, you don't have to study. Language learning is heavy work on all of us. So another set of fossilized teaching habits. Building a solid scaffolding, let's say, framework, so that whatever we do in class helps students succeed. You might feel that there is a slight contradiction here, the fact that they might make mistakes when they speak, but strive for success. This is because I do not think that success in language learning is not making errors. Success is daring to participate, daring to open your mouth and speak the language no matter what. So nothing succeeds like success. There is no other way to make students invest emotionally in their own learning but to see that this new way works out. We, of course, have to prepare them that it's not something that happens quickly, and this is the magic word for them. They want everything to happen fast, snapping our fingers and changing situations, but unfortunately, it cannot happen. So what's scaffolding? In this case, we're using it not in the Vygotsky sense, but in the sense of providing a very solid framework to support our students step by step when we do an activity. This has to do with how we anticipate problems, how well we know our students so that we can anticipate valid problems, how well we manage to maintain let's say that support system for as long as they need it, and then how we remove it gradually so that they can start making their own steps and they can speak on their own or use the structure on their own. For example, anticipated problems, and I do not mean written anticipated problems on a formal lesson plan sheet, do not have to do with only with the idea of passing exams or being observed. For me, they're a very useful tool. They help me plan activities. They help me understand what I need to do prior to something. I will apologize because I do not remember if I have mentioned that. I have mentioned this example many, many times because as we plan our classes, it's something that we can very easily skip. A few years ago, I was teaching a C senior class. That's, let's say, high up, a kind of an advanced A2 level. And they were a good group. They would be doing a dialogue with a person who's just had an accident. So I wanted my students to work on accidents, emergency services, calling for an ambulance, calling the police, getting help, paramedics. And as I was designing the activity, which would be a brainstorming activity, so you see an accident, what do you do? What do you expect your parents, who are the drivers, to do? You're not involved in it, but what do we do as responsible citizens? I stopped for a minute and I thought, how much of this vocabulary do they know? Okay, they know police. They perhaps know ambulance, though I doubt if they can pronounce it. And the way they see it is only when they are on the street. So I need to pre-teach certain vocabulary items. I need to introduce them gradually, because if I ask a question and my students are scratching their heads or are looking, they're rolling their eyes or they're yawning, this is going to demotivate me. If I am demotivated, I'm losing my spirit, and obviously I'm going to start feeling that something is off, and I might react in a way that shows that makes the learners feel that they are put on the spot, and that creates problems in our climate and in our bonding and rapport. So in order to avoid all that, I need to scaffold my activity. I need to support my students learning in a way so that when the time comes, they can actually use the vocabulary that I've already presented, and they can use it successfully. What gets in the way? Well, the digital culture gets in the way, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But learners have become experts in finding information on the internet. Only the other day, I was teaching my very Greek students, and the unit that we were doing had a lot of derivatives. That's a C1 class. And some of these focused on, let's say, words that have very similar endings and very similar meanings. So physician, physicist, psychologist, psychotherapist. And as you can see, the root is Greek. And very cleverly, the book used ancient philosophers and ancient, let's say, celebrities, personalities. And my very Greek students got lost in the idea of physicist and physician. And when I asked them, I said, guys, how could you not remember that Hippocrates was a doctor? He was a physician. And they were like, who learns those things? Everybody, everything is on the internet. We don't need to know anything. Computers are there. And that worries me. It worries me because students have created their own fallacies. Computers are not in charge of creating knowledge. Computers are not in charge of overseeing or monitoring our knowledge. We are in charge of computers. We create applications. We create digital libraries. We create the material and the things needed in order to curate the knowledge, the millennia of knowledge that goes behind that. Why do our students have this misconception, and why do they harbor it so piously, I would say? Give them a scanning task. They're good at it. Give them a skimming task. They're good at it. Give them extensive and intensive reading. We've lost them. And that has nothing to do with their fluency. It has to do with the patience they show. Everything has to be fast-paced. Everything has to be quick, like fast food and fast success out of reality shows. It seems that we are going towards a culture that does not assimilate and does not process deeply. This means that knowledge not only is deprived of its potential for far-reaching outcomes and far-reaching effects, it is also underused, underexploited, and potentially miscommunicated, misunderstood. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? Negative transference. It tells us that students will suffer because they have not fully understood what we are teaching them. Another thing that we need to look at is who our learners are. So in the last few years, we've all been working with the CEFR. We've all been talking about learners' biography. But as teachers, we do not always know what has happened in our students' learning. And when we take on a new class, that's easy because we can have activities that help us see what our learners have done and where they have come from. And if these students have been students with our school for a number of years, we can go back to their files and see what they're good at, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. But at the same time, we need to take into consideration the point of entry. And when I say point of entry, I don't mean if we have met them when they are nearing their B1 or B2 exam. I mean how B1, their B1 level is. Sometimes students are in a B1 class or in an A2 class, but they're either higher or lower, the upper end or the lower end of this pendulum. And I say pendulum because it does swift throughout the year and it becomes harder sometimes for them to excel. But if we have a student who barely passed a B2 exam, his C1 level, or the fact that he enters a C1 class, is not the same as a student who actually excelled and has already attained C1 level. As I mentioned before, this generation is really into fast-paced learning, not necessarily because of intensive lessons or because they want to be done with English. That might be part of it, but mainly because they do not want to invest in anything that is slow, and they do not spend time monitoring their own learning. They do not spend time understanding how they should organize their language learning. Therefore, there are no metacognitive skills. And if there are, this is because teachers try to instill and, in a way, present and practice them in class. But once again, autonomy training, strategies, metacognitive skills, all of these are amazing. They take an individual who presents them and another individual or set of individuals who are going to activate them when the time comes. Another part is that students tend to have a very weird view of what education is. So they sometimes tend to reflect what their parents think. If their parents feel that this is an important class, they reflect that. Or sometimes if the parents feel that this is an important class, they might know that it's an important class, but they just rebel against it just for the sake of being rebels. Also, because of this situation, they have a number of fossilized mistakes, and fossilized mistakes are, let's say, the most indicative example of negative transfer. They experience stress either because they are pressurized by the system itself that they have to succeed, or their parents put them into this little situation where they have to chase their tail, as I usually feel they do. And all of this leads to a game that is set against them. They view education as a conspiracy of adults against teenagers, as a way to eat up their free time, and as useless because everybody goes to university, but then they either get a job or don't get a job. But so what's so important about it? Computers do everything. We do have a remark. Let me read that one. It is getting harder and harder to convince young learners that studying English is important. I'm happy you related that because I feel that in Greece we have the same problem. They do study English. They have to learn English. But I will even say that for students who register for foreign universities, although they know that they will be studying psychology and advanced mathematics and economics in English in a matter of 2 years, they do not understand that learning a language at C2 level is very different from speaking very broken English that can get you through and can help you, I don't know, communicate and get the next train out of one city and go to the other. So this whole thing is not just simply in one country, it's happening everywhere. And this is why I feel, although I love technology, it's gone so early into their lives that it has changed the way they feel and they think about knowledge. They do use Google Translate a lot. And the more I tell them, although Google Translate has improved in the last few years, still, it is not a place. to learn language. Personally, when I use Google Translate for Polish, what I do is I try to find what Google Translate will bring, and then I take that and go back to my English Polish and Polish English dictionary, and I cross check. So it's not simply Google Translate; it's Google Translate with a lot more, and it's a way sometimes to boost my own confidence in using something. So lack of personal engagement is the number one reason, because in that case, we see things, we don't see eye to eye with our students. We want different things. Unless they invest in their own language learning, though, they are not going to make sense out of it. And of course, they're never going to take responsibility. They will simply go on doing the same things that they did, and they're going to be repeating, let's say, the same strategies that didn't work the same time. Um, we as teachers cannot get into the argument of whether it is important or not. We as teachers should present it in a way the students actually look forward to having lessons. You're right. You're right. Personally, I don't think that I am so gung-ho on whether or not they see it as important. I'm as English being important as a subject. What I'm interested in is whether they understand that learning and training our minds to learn is important. To be honest, I'm scared. Um, I'm getting this feeling that the more we get our students to see what digital technology has done, what we can accomplish through apps and websites and whatever else we have been blessed to use, we give them a different kind of aspect to that. I didn't mean that we should get into an argument of whether English is interesting or important. As a director of studies, and also as a manager, whenever I have been a manager, I do not understand why parents come to school to register their children and they kind of whisper, we do not like English so much. He doesn't. And I'm wondering, I'm looking at the mother thinking, so why are you about to spend all that lovely money on something that your kid doesn't like? Get them to do a language they enjoy. And if they do not enjoy language learning, hold off for the time being. Because creating this negative feeling that I was put to do a task that I did not want to do, I was forced into a class where I didn't belong and never wanted to belong, because learning English is important, gets us the wrong results, the opposite results, actually. Therefore, this gives me a great way to go back to what I wanted to say. As teachers, we need to plan lessons that will make the students, will grab their attention and entice them to stay focused, not force them to stay focused, but make it appetizing, give them a reason. So, how can we achieve learner engagement? We have to analyze the needs of our class. When teaching methodology, I always tell my students that everything starts and finishes with a needs analysis. Who are my learners? What time is our lesson? Because that is also a problem. I mean, we are lucky it's Monday today. This time tomorrow, I will barely have finished teaching, and it is 10:30 in Greece. I know it's 9:30 in Poland, but at this time of the night, having been at school all day, they nag. Of course they nag. So I need to find what motivates them. I need to find how they think and how they learn best, what needs they have, and how I can build in variation, let's say little injections of variation. That could be varying the interaction patterns. Sometimes when I tell them, don't tell me, tell each other, they kind of go, oh, miss, then we have to present. And I'm like, yes, but that way you practice. And the more you practice, the more you use the language. And that means we are moving closer to our goal. Another thing is that our lessons cannot be imbalanced. And by that, I mean, I do not understand the existence of grammar lessons. There should be a variety of things, and there should be a need to get the grammar in because the students need it in order to express themselves or to talk about something. They need the vocabulary. They need to listen to the language so that they can pick up information about the intonation of the language. But putting all of this together leads us towards a culmination, a project, a presentation. And the pacing should be equally different. I can't run lessons in which everybody is, going fast, 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 and faster. And by the end of the class, we are all like we've been running a marathon. We need to have faster times and quiet times, times when we play a game, and times when we just sit quietly and think to ourselves. We also need to put quality over quantity. And I say that because I've often been at the disputing end of syllabi and how much we pile on one lesson and how much we expect the poor teacher to achieve. When you mean that you start at 7, Katarzyna, when you say that you start at 10 past 7, you start in the evening at 10 past 7 or in the morning at 10 past 7. Morning. Oh gosh, what time do they wake up? Of course, it's a problem. Do you think they hope professional teachers might show the kids to fall in love with the language? In a way, that's part of the inspiration, but much like falling in love, like humans falling in love, if we try too hard, it doesn't happen. The more we try to make the students fall in love, it's like that Michael Endo novel. He says at some point, the more you press the handle to open the door, the more the door doesn't open. Let your hand loose and the door will open. Don't show the handle how much you want the door to be opened. And it's the same. The more we become, I can't say overly enthusiastic, because of course we are overly enthusiastic. It's 10:30 for me. It's almost quarter to 11. It's quarter to 10 for you, and we are overly enthusiastic about what we do. The way we transfer it has to showcase our own passion. And the more we make our classes enjoyable, and the more they see a kind of teaching that is different, a class where they do not come to be judged, they do not come to be seen as marks and as the result of one test that determines all others, this creates a kind of positive feeling towards the language. And of course, we cannot oversee the fact that they do listen to music and they do watch films which are in English, especially in Greece. That's a huge help. And they do use English to access websites that have to do with their favorite pastimes and playing games. So offering a supportive environment is also very important. Therefore, to start wrapping things up, everything starts with teacher engagement. Unless we are engaged, nothing is going to happen. The second step is to put immediate teaching that has been planned for today's class with these very students in the forefront. And also to build a reciprocal relationship in which we see that learners help us and we help learners. This kind of relationship empowers the learners. It gives them choices. It gives them things they can choose from. So process of interaction and also process of co-exploration. Very often I see my learners approaching a certain text, or I see them evaluating a certain attitude or discussing a certain video, and their own insight into it gives me a greater understanding of what of how the modern the generation now sees it. We need to get them to understand that unless they set their own goals, those goals are not going to be believable. Me setting goals for them means nothing. Their parents setting goals for them means nothing. And they need to learn to monitor those goals. And of course, it's very interesting to see how we can get them to share their stories of success, how they can, I'm sorry, I missed an S there. I've just noticed how we can get them to present their own studying strategies or the strategies for overcoming something. Obviously, when it comes to anything metacognitive, we cannot simply take it as we hear it and apply it. We need to adapt it to ourselves, but adaptation is the name of the game at any rate. Investing in autonomy training is also going to be helpful, and the first step is to show learners what they can accomplish. In the last few years, homework has got a bad reputation, I would say. we keep thinking that it's too much, that we make students lose their childhood and their teenage years and their free time. Personally, I first of all, if we change the name and from homework it becomes self-study or home study, it creates a different feeling. For me, it's the time where they can sit quietly, familiarize themselves with the material, understand it, and assimilate it. It's the time when we can show them a little bit, we can involve them in a little bit of decision making. We can give them two different pieces of homework which are equal in value or difficulty, and they can choose which one they do. And this will offer them kind of defamiliarization, and this defamiliarization can extend in class. I think this is a real weapon in the hands of the teacher. You never know what to expect in this class. It is not open your books, do the first exercise, read loudly, write dictation, write a quiz, write a test, that's your mark, go away, pass exams. If we want to make learning far reaching, we need to make planning for this learning more researched, and of course grounded and based and focused on this particular class that we are teaching. What do great teachers do differently? Well, great teachers manage to make themselves redundant, and they manage to train learners who actually become great teachers of themselves, because the illiterate of the 21st century is not the person who cannot read or write, as Alvin Toffler said in the 1980s, but the person who cannot keep learning. So, with the hope that we will all keep learning, I would like to share with you my resources and my bibliography. And I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the invitation. It's a January appointment I always look forward to keeping. I do hope I will visit Poland one of the next conferences. And I have one comment that I haven't read. Even though we can engage them in activities and present them language or any other topic in an interesting way, they just don't seem to understand that the knowledge they acquire is for them to use in life, not as a valuable possession, not to succeed in school. You're absolutely right. It is a in a way, they see English as part of the curriculum. They see it on the program. It's easy when you're in this situation where you have been conditioned and trained to parrot, let's say, geography, religious education, music, because I learned that they write exams even in music. Sometimes they take tests in music. It's very difficult to see that this is not going to be applied. It is going to be reproduced and then forgotten. I believe we reach the point where we have to make a clean break. We really, truly have to start thinking of other ways of teaching our learners, and perhaps blended learning, flipped classrooms, enhanced learning spaces, and even, I would dare say, different, less lecture style teaching, though this is hardly economic, will help us. Thank you all so much, and dobranoc.
Thank you for being with us for such a long time. Thank you. You always give your time to us, and we are really grateful to you. We hope for the next webinar. Bye bye, everyone.